The story begins with this princess named Nike who was sent to the country of the sun to marry the king of the sun, who conquered the world in 3 years. Nike was sent by her father to that country so that her country would benefit, and she was chosen through a game of rock, paper, scissors with her older sisters. In the country of the sun, Nike is surprised because everything is very expensive, and since she comes from a poor country, she is treated poorly. When she was looking for accommodation, she couldn't find any. Then these two people appeared who offered her accommodation at a very good price. She got excited, but they only wanted to rob her, and she was going to put them in their place, but because of the hunger she couldn't do anything. When she wakes up, she finds a humble family who helped her and gave her food. After eating, she got to know the sisters better, who are Lisa and Mina. Nikki tells them her story and that she was coming to marry the king, but they obviously didn't believe her at first. But the next day they started to believe her because she didn't seem to be lying. While Nikki and Lisa were walking through the city, Nikki realizes that they don't have water problems, even though it doesn't usually rain in the country. Lisa tells her that it's thanks to the King of the Sun who not only improved the cities, but also expelled bad people and improved the country's economy. Later, the same guys from before hired them to kidnap Nike, but they got confused and took Mina instead. When they realized it wasn't Nike, they were going to do who knows what to Mina, but Nike appeared, and I hadn't told you, but in Nike's country it is the Principality of Rain where they are able to control the weather. So Nike uses her powers to send these two fools flying. Later, Nike subdued the fools to take her to the capital, and she said goodbye to them and promised to return even if she became the princess of the kingdom. After a long journey, when she arrived in the capital, the first thing she did was claim to be Princess Nike and get into a fight with the guards because she didn't show her identification. But after clearing up the misunderstanding, she was introduced to the Sun King, who turned out to be this boy Luvius I, or Libby to his friends. He was also surprised to see that the princess they had sent him was a troublemaker. However, since he knew that Nike's family could control the weather, he told her that it never rained in the capital and he was tired of the sun. That's why he ordered her to make it rain in the capital. Nike didn't take it very well because she didn't want to fulfill the whims of a brat. But since that brat was the king of the country, he ended up locking Nike up and not feeding her until she agreed to be his toy. After a while, Nike escaped from prison using her powers. Instead of running away, she went to visit the king to beat him up. But because she was very hungry, her stomach betrayed her and Libby tried to convince her again to use her powers to make it rain. She explained that her powers came from a rain ritual and couldn't be used out of nowhere. In order for her to make it rain, he had to show her how wonderful this world was. The next day, since practically these two were now a couple, they spent time together, even though they didn't get along very well. In fact, they seemed like siblings. One day, the king was attacked and Nike saved him. But she ended up getting hurt, and Libby showed his evil side, punishing anyone who opposed him. When Nike recovered, he sent her back to her kingdom, which she didn't like. On the way, Nil, Libby's right-hand man, apologized for what Libby had done, explaining that he did it to protect her. He also told her the story of how Livy and his mother, named Sheila, were from a lower class and lived hidden in the castle. When he ascended to the throne, he conquered the world. In 3 years, but that was just a distraction to fill the void she had because her mother had been murdered. On the way they realized there was a fire in the castle, and it turns out they set fire to Luvius' room, but he was able to escape, and when Nick arrived, he performed a ritual to make it rain, managing to extinguish the fire, and Livy was fascinated by the rain. Later Nick talks to Livy and she was waiting for him to thank her for saving him, but he only complained because he could make it rain without having to do everything she had told him. But she tells him that she did it because it was an emergency and she didn't want to waste any more time. But he doesn't plan on letting her go and kisses her and tells her that her life will be interesting with her. The next morning, since Livy's room was ruined, she usually goes to sleep with Nick naked, something she doesn't like. Livy also plans to have a party to announce that they're engaged and asks him to make it rain at the party for the guests, but Nikki refuses and they have several fights about it. In the afternoon, when Nikki was in the garden, some guests of high social rank arrived, and this guy started speaking ill of Nikki for being from a poor country, but at that moment Livy appears and tells him to watch his words because she is his wife. On the day of the party, Livy was worried that Nikki wouldn't show up, but he appeared in an elegant dress and performed the rain ritual, leaving everyone amazed, and at that point the guy from before was already looking at Nick with different eyes. But obviously Livy wasn't going to let anyone seduce her future wife. After that, things continued as usual, and since their wedding was going to be soon, they made several preparations and put Nick on a diet so he could fit into the dress. But the wedding was not going to be able to take place because the priests opposed their wedding because Nick was from another country and they had different ethnicities. But in reality, they were against Libius because he stopped the corrupt acts that the church was doing. And to resolve the issue, Nikki would have to perform an absurd ritual where she would risk her life for them to approve the wedding. At first, Livio told Nikki that he would take care of it, but she wanted to handle things on her own. So when she went to the church and helped this girl, she was about to fight with the church members, but then this guy, Laniarus, appeared. When he recognized Nick, he started speaking ill of her and told her the story where Libby's mother was hated by the city, but the king at that time protected her and now Libby is dishonoring the throne. Nick gets upset, but the girl from before stopped her from causing trouble and later took her to an orphanage where she told her that thanks to Libby, the lives of orphans from different ethnicities had improved. Despite not being very involved in the orphanage, he usually goes there to buy flowers, which he himself has been leaving daily in Nick's room without her knowing. After that, Nick decides to take the tests and Libby was somewhat angry, but he gave her the ring that his mother had left him to protect her. So Nick takes the test where she has to find the ring of the sun god. The test was not easy for her as she couldn't use her powers in a space with little air, but she managed to reach the place, and when she opened the ring box, she realized it was a trap set by the church. Fortunately, she was able to escape and ended up meeting Libby, who already suspected this would happen. As they were returning to the castle, they were attacked and the ring that Libby had given her was cut in half. He got angry and almost killed the guy if it weren't for Nick, who insisted he shouldn't do it. Nick apologizes for what happened to the ring, but he only cares that she is okay. By the day of the ceremony, they wouldn't be able to perform the ceremony without the ring, but they made a plan to make the people in the church nervous so that they would confess. And it worked because one of them said they couldn't perform the ceremony because Nick didn't have the ring, and Livy interrupted the ritual, implying that they were the ones who attacked her. Lanny could no longer hide the truth, and since the king is the one who makes the decisions, Lanny was lost. But Nick hid him and helped him choose the right path. With everything resolved, Nick usually helps the farmers, and Libby became jealous. One day, out of nowhere, this girl Luna arrived, who came to compete with Nick because she had feelings for Libby. At first, she had problems with Nick because Libby was engaged to him, but after a race where she almost died and Nick saved her, they ended up becoming friends, more or less. On one occasion, when Nick and Livy returned to the castle, they were afraid of Neil because they had escaped to go to a festival, but when they entered, they were greeted by this guy, Bar Gwyn, who was the brother of the previous king and Livy's uncle. Bar, upon seeing his nephew, immediately tried to seduce Livy, whom he didn't like because he had previously been the prime minister, but one day he abandoned his position and disappeared out of nowhere. Now, after Livy didn't want to see him, all he does is try to seduce Nick. Neil ended up asking him to leave because what he was doing was not right. The next night, they both ended up at Bart's welcome party, but since Livy couldn't stand him, she told Nick she would be waiting for him on the balcony. However, when she was on her way, she hurt her ankle, and Bart took advantage of the situation to take her away. As Nick didn't arrive, Libby got worried, and Bart tried to seduce her again, this time with more determination. But Nick told him to stop lying because she could tell he wasn't in love with her. And he was relieved to see what kind of girl she is. But at that moment, Libby arrives all pissed off and sends Bart to prison and tells Nick that he could lock her in her room for life and not to take it lightly because he could burn her country completely. The next day Livy tries to make her happy, but Nick was angry with him, and they ended up arguing as usual. Later that night Nick went to free Bart, and they ended up talking, and he tells her that since they were children they never got along with Livy, but both wanted to protect the same person who was Livy's mother, and even though he was in love with her that feeling was not reciprocated. But after losing her both felt great pain, and when they conquered the world, Barth did not dare to speak to Lubius. That's why he ran away. That's why he asks her to stay with him and support him, and he will travel again. But Nick tells him to dare to face Lubius and talk to him for support, but he says that Lubius will not allow it. Nick does not accept it, and with Neil's help manages to bring them together in a place without them knowing. And after telling each other about the past where they conquered the world, united the peoples and defeated their enemies, Levi became a broken child. That's why he ended up running away, to see the world as Shayla would see it. In the middle of the conversation they realized that Nikki was exhausted, but thanks to her, Levi told her how he felt and asked her to return to her position as Prime Minister, to which she gladly accepted. And from there they returned to being the same as always. Days later everyone was overwhelmed with work, and when Nick was doing his ritual, Libby realized that something was wrong with him, so she asked him what was wrong, and she told them that she received a letter where her family told her that her grandmother collapsed. She was the one who taught her to sing and practically raised her, and her grandmother just wanted to see her again. Luvius did not think twice and cancelled a Nike's schedule to let her go, but he would accompany her, although there were some objections to the king leaving his work, but he left Bart in charge. Then they went to the country of Nick, and there they were received by one of his sisters and this grandfather, who were very relaxed to be with the king who rules the world. They took them to their grandmother, and it turns out that she only had a back pain after returning from a trip. Then the other two sisters of Nick arrived and did not leave Livy alone. But a while later Livy and Neil started to feel unwell because as foreigners they could not stand the climate. So they went to rest, and Nick prepared food for Lubius, and his family mirrored the sky so they could see the stars, and Lubius told her that he felt very grateful to be with her. At that moment Nick, without thinking, gave him a kiss, although they both ended up blushing. The next day Nick was still very nervous about what she had done. Livy was calmer, but still in a romantic mood, and on the way they met Keturah, Nick's childhood friend and Livy's father-in-law. That is, Nick's father, and he tells her the story of the town, where there was a time of drought and many people insisted that it was their opportunity to expand using their powers, but Nick's grandmother closed the borders to prevent their powers from being involved in the war, and unlike him, she knows how to govern, since when she went on a trip, the first thing she did was send Nick to marry in another country, and of course she scolded him. Later Keturah goes to talk alone with Nick, or at least that's what she thought, since she ended up immobilized in order to make her stay in the country, and it turns out that the one behind all this was the grandmother. Keturah ended up locking Nick in a place where she cannot use her powers and tells her that they want her to stay in the country where she could be safe, and for that they plan to have her locked up until they hypnotize Livy to make him lose his affection towards her and cancel his engagement. Meanwhile, Livy was told that Nikki was very sick and could not see her. And when they tried to hypnotize him, he didn't let himself be fooled and quickly went to look for Nikki, and luckily one of Nikki's sisters helped him and he was able to reach where she was locked up. But there was the grandmother who confronted him, but she told him that if he found the keys to Nikki's cell before the mud covered him, she would let him stay with her. While this was happening, Nick tried to break the cell with his own body and Keturah suffered watching her hurt herself, and she told him that she didn't care about hurting herself or going against her people as long as she didn't lose Livy because she loved him. Keturah couldn't take it anymore and ended up freeing her, but upon hearing her say that, it was difficult for him to look her in the face. On the way, Nick met his sister who told him that the hypnosis failed, but Luvius fought with the grandmother, so he hurried, and when he arrived Luvius was already breathing, so he gave him first aid. And when he finally started breathing again, the first thing he did was show the grandmother that he found the key. When things calmed down the girls apologized for not doing anything, but Luvius only considered it a discussion between son-in-law and grandmother. With everything resolved, the Nike family was preparing a ceremony and Livius met Nike's mother, Araja, who due to her illness couldn't leave the bed much, but she wasn't going to miss her daughter's ceremony. By the way, at the ceremony everyone teased Nick, even Livius did, but he promised his family that he would make Nick very happy. Before returning to the City of the Sun, Livy went to settle his problem with Kitora who, like him, was in love with Nick, and after a talk about how difficult it was to deal with her, they even became friends. The only one they had problems with was the grandmother because she didn't want to talk to Nike, but she told her anyway and knew that she preferred her to stay in the country to live in peace. But unlike the first time she left, this time she did it because she felt happy to be with Livius. She also thanked him for everything he did for her and asked him to take care of himself. The grandmother, being stubborn as she is, had no intentions of saying goodbye, but Livius made her understand that they would not see Nike for a long time, so it would be best for her to say goodbye. However, in the end, she did not say goodbye, and as they were leaving, the grandmother appeared and sang a song that was used to say goodbye in a very warm way in that country. When they finally arrived at the kingdom, Bart had a mess on his hands as the entire palace was filled with debauchery, so Livius was not very happy about it. To make matters worse, he had not done his job properly, so he had to spend a lot of time working, during which he could not see Nike even once, who was very depressed because of that. After thinking about him for a long time, he ended up appearing on a horse, and they both ended up telling each other how painful it was not to see each other, and the anime ended with them kissing. And that's the end of the summary of this wonderful anime. I hope you liked it. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button, as it helps and motivates me to keep creating more content for you. See you soon.